Okay, so we're going to get started. And again, welcome everyone. Akiba, Hotel, Jumbo, Barigani. Hey, as we say now, what up, though?
What up, though? That's right. It's Detroit. What up, though?
We welcome each and every one of you. We thank you for joining us. We are excited to share the history of the Mother Shrine this evening for our Woke Wednesday presentation. Let us begin with a moment of prayer. Eternal and omnipotent one, we give thanks and praise for your presence among us, for bringing us these 69 years over the hills and valleys, over the struggles and challenges, over the heartaches and pains, the losses, the victories, the celebrations, the jubilance, the joy that we have experienced working for the liberation of African people everywhere. We thank you for each member of our church, those near and far, those who have gone on before us. And we ask, Lord, that you continue to inspire us, to inspire the next generation to carry our legacy forward into the 22nd and 23rd century and beyond. We are thankful and grateful, and we surrender our will to your divine purpose. We pray this in the name of our revolutionary example and standard bearer, the Black Messiah, Jesus. And we say Ashe,
Ashe,
and Amen.
Amen.
So we're going to begin tonight. We're going to jump right into it. And as we all know, 60 minutes is not a lot of time to do justice to the history of our mother, the Mother Shrine. But we're going to just try to give you an overview, and hopefully we'll touch on some things that you didn't know about the history of the church and wet your whistle for a further project coming up at a theater near you soon, a documentary.
Amen.
Be trying to figure out how we can raise a couple $100,000 so we can do a documentary and do the history of our church justice. So that's just something to think about. So we're going to start this evening, the first leg of our presentation. We're going to turn it over to Reverend Dr. Mutha Maki. You may begin, sir.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. We're talking about the starting of the shrine, and that goes back. We could talk about Jaramogi. We all know he came back to Detroit already equipped and with an agenda already to build a church and build a community. And he defines the church as a transforming community that mediates the power of God. And the church acts for God in the world. These are the things that we have come to expect from God: comfort, solace, healing, security, guidance, help, forgiveness, strength, and understanding. And he says a lot of other things that really defines the purpose of the church. Jaramogi came back to Detroit after establishing a successful ministry at St. John's Congregational Church in Springfield, Massachusetts. He was there from 1945 to 1950 when he was called to Detroit to pastor at St. Mark's Presbyterian Church. Now, St. Mark's Presbyterian Church is right there on what we call Rosa Parks now, but it used to be 12th Street, right at Atchison. And it's really coincidental that that church was right down the street from Gordon Park. Gordon Park is the place where we had the rebellion. Some of you all still call it riot, but I call it rebellion. And now that church is a restaurant that's generally peopled by white folks there. But it's just coincidental to me. So there's some power and some energy still there. He came back to Detroit and he pastored St. Mark's Presbyterian Church. And St. Mark's Presbyterian Church at that time was an integrated church, Black and white folks. Jaramogi, being true to himself, reached out to the community, particularly the Black community in that area, especially 12th Street, that area, and tried to do some things with the community. And many of the white members of the St. Mark's did not like that. They did not like that. And they fought him about it. And so he packed his bags and grabbed, with the support of 300 other parishioners at St. Mark's, and left, walked out and established the Central Church of God. And the first place that they had the church at was a mansion that they had purchased over on Chicago Boulevard. And I, as a teenager, remember that because I went there to cover some events on behalf of the Pittsburgh Courier paper where I was writing. And it was quite a laid out place, but it got to be a little too small for, you're talking about 300 people. So they moved to Crossman School on Dexter. That was back in 1953. They moved to Crossman School on Dexter. I guess it would be really, yeah. And they had church there. Let me just say this, that Crossman School was for those of you who remember Deacon Olawanza. He was a head custodian there. And so either he was already a member or whatever it was a beautiful relationship. And anyway, he helped take care of this whole business. Okay, so at Crossman School, they were there until 1956. And in 1956, we bought, Jaramogi, the congregation there, bought the Pilgrim Brewster Church, or Congregational Church over on Linwood, where it is now, 7625 Linwood. And I was really going there quite a bit to cover different events that were going on there, because in the city of Detroit at that time, you had a breakup of the community that was promoted by the expressways going through there and tearing up the community, the West Side community, or around where the church is and so forth. So you had a lot of other things going on too that were not particularly positive. You had a lot of gangs in that area and so forth and so on. But Jaramogi had an agenda, and there's things that he was trying to do, and he did. You know, he organized a youth fellowship, and it was one of the most viable youth fellowships and Black fellowships in the city of Detroit. And I used to write articles on that, and they had all kinds of activities. They had clubs and organizations and in there that would come in and meet in there. And I remember they had a particular social activity called the Jabberwock, and that was a play that they put on, and a musical they put on, and I covered that. I remember covering that. But what I'm saying here is that he gave the young people structure that they could grow in and become a productive adults.
Reverend Doctor.
Mm-hmm.
2 minutes.
Oh, okay. I'm just about done. But anyway, so and we there through that fellowship, a lot of young people did grow into professional lives. I can name a few. Emmett Haygood. I can't think of his African name right now. And let me tell you that one of the young ladies in that fellowship, her name was Carlotta Tynetta Nelson. Carlotta's a sister. Anyway, she wound up being the wife of Elijah Muhammad in later life. But anyway, the Jaramogi was very active. He was the NAACP recruiter, and he brought a lot of people into the NAACP. He also spoke out against redistricting, where they were trying to take the congressional seat, as they have done here. And he fought against that and was successful. And also, he spoke out against the police brutality that was continuous in our community. And he was the only minister. I remember coming out of Second Baptist Church, going especially to hear him preach a trilogy of sermons against that. So he had something for everybody. He had something for the youth. He had something for the adults. He had something for the political process. And he had something for growing us to love ourselves. And he was our leader. And he opened the door for more Black nationalism and Pan-African beginnings. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Doctor, for that presentation. We're going to keep it moving. We're going to invite Reverend Rashida Mary Blackman to take the next leg of our presentation.
Thank you very much. Mine will be rather personal reflections of my membership. I was invited to join Central Congregational Church Choir shortly after graduating from Mumford High by my Aunt Hilda, who was a member of the church's choir. My family had moved to our current address across from Central High Complex from 8 Mile, where I had been attending church. And after we moved, because my pastor also wanted me to continue to work as choir director, really more of a song leader and soloist at the church, he would pick me up every Sunday morning, bring me home following service. I really enjoyed my friends and fellowship at Calvary AME Zion Church. However, Deacon Oscar Hand, later to become Deacon Olamwanza, welcomed me to the choir, and before too long, I was one of the featured soloists. I thoroughly enjoyed being a member of the choir and learning from Deacon Hand. Joining the church was the beginning of my political awakening. I was very fortunate that I had never felt uncomfortable and inadequate in my Black skin. My father called me his little African, as I was always quite chocolate, and I wore that description proudly. So DBI and ABI, the declaration of and the acceptance of Black inferiority, were not a part of my conscious experience. However, my understanding of how racism kept our people subjugated and limited our financial and political power became eminently clear as I continued coming to Central Congregational Church. I was now experiencing a new reality and a new plan and approach as to how we as Black people needed to address becoming self-determining. I became politically active and worked in all of the iterations of the church's activities in educating and elevating our thinking and actions. Like many of us, it was difficult for my family to understand the amount of time I was devoting to church functions and activities. Because of my church involvement, I was never at home. I was excited to be a part of the church's exponential growth. The choir's transition from traditional gospel to revolutionary original songs added to and complemented the energy of Jaramogi's messages, and he was very supportive of and encouraged the choir's evolution. He credited the music ministry for energizing and preparing the congregation to receive his messages. Little did I know I was soon to be a part of a revolutionary movement that would help to shape the city's and the county's awakening. I also was not aware that I was being prepared to undertake a future of service to our cities and county's children. Cardinal Nandi, Barbara Martin, and Sister Makunda, Councilwoman, State Representative, and Congresswoman Barbara Rose Collins would eventually convince me to run for Detroit School Board. I was the second person elected citywide to the board. Why? Because of Jaramogi, the Black Slate, our church's volunteer workers, and subsequently as a result of a vacancy on the Wayne County Intermediate School District, I was appointed to that vacancy. Afterward, elected to that position where I have served since 1982. All of these accomplishments were possible because of the Shrine's influence through the Black Slate and the preparation and support I have received. So I am blessed indeed to be a part of a movement, a church, a theology, a thought and change process, which continues to focus on educating, empowering, shaping, and determining the future of Black people. Another one of the highlights of my church service was when I was selected to form a committee to award the Jaramogi Ababy Ajiman Scholarship, which would annually present scholarships to high school graduating church members or those graduating from Detroit schools who demonstrated academic excellence and community service and values. We have awarded over $45,000 since our inception. I think I came within my time limit.
Thank you, Reverend Rashida. So I just want to point out a few tidbits from that period. Some of you have heard of the Illustrated News, our bi-weekly newspaper devoted to publishing the issues confronting the Black community. It began in 1962. And then, as many of you know, the 1963 Freedom March was held in Detroit at Cobo Hall Rev, as we called him back then, was central in organizing that march. And he also spoke at the grassroots conference that was held at King Solomon Hall here in Detroit. Then in '65, he ran for governor of the state of Michigan on the Freedom Now Party ticket, and he was the first Black person to do so since Reconstruction. And of course, the Freedom Now Party was the forerunner to the Black Slate. Then in 1965-66, the Inner City Organizing Committee, organization that was focused on direct community action, was formed under Rev's leadership. So there were a lot of things going on in that time period in the early 60s. And we're going to have a short clip that's going to give you a sense of the energy and the frame of mind that Black people were in and that Reverend Clegg was responsible for inspiring. So I'm going to ask Reverend Karima to cue up that video for us.
I want to go for a moment to Reverend Clegg's congregation in Detroit and ask Reverend Clegg if I can still get him. Nobody, I think, Dr. Clegg, would deny that there is a struggle in this country. Can you still hear me?
All right, let's go. Okay. We are through with this white hypocrisy, with the efforts of white people to set up a situation that they can control. We are tired of sociologists and psychologists talking us to death. We are tired of police commissioners and police experts telling us that we're not getting our heads whipped. We are through. The Black Revolution is in progress, and it's going on, and we don't care what kind of guns they
Dr. Poussin, as a psychiatrist...
They can't stop it. I don't care what they do, it's going on. There's nothing they can do.
Dr. Poussin, as a psychiatrist, I don't want you to put the Reverend...
Okay, so again, you can get a sense of the energy of the times, and Rev was always on fire, just like that, always. So I'm gonna turn it over to Reverend Elijah. She's gonna take this next segment of the presentation. Reverend Elijah.
All right. 1967 was a very transitional year for the church. I can identify at least 5 significant transitional things that changed the church and its members. 1967 was a very transitional year for the church. I can identify at least 5 traditional things that changed the church and its members. Number 1, Easter Sunday, March 26, 1967 was the unveiling of the mural of the Black Madonna and Child by artist Glanton Dowdell. This launched the Black Christian nationalist movement to reflect the church's belief that Jesus was Black. Number 2, Reverend Clegg began talking about the new directions for the church and changing the name of the church to reflect the changes the church was going to be implementing. Number 3, the unveiling of the Black Madonna and Child, Reverend Clegg preaching about Jesus being Black and introducing a new Black theology to the membership raised a storm of controversy within the membership. Many of the members were not happy with the direction of the church and that the church was taking, and they left the church. As those members left the church, young adults throughout the Detroit community started visiting and joining the church. Number 4, I was one of those people that joined the church the first Sunday in July, 1967. And joining the church changed my life for the best. Number 5, Sunday, June 23rd, 1967, there was a rebellion in Detroit. This rebellion was a wake-up call in the Black community. More and more Black folks wanted to be a part of organizing to make a difference in their community. Reverend Clegg formed the Citywide Citizen Action Committee, which was born out of the July Rebellion of '67. The purpose of the Citywide Citizens Action Committee was to make a reality of the dream of self-determination among inner city residents and to help develop a new inner city in which Black people could live with dignity, pride, and justice. The Citywide Citizens Action Committee was a network of Black organizations dealing with economic development in the Black community. Reverend Clegg was the chairperson, and Gladden Dowdell was the co-chairman of the Citywide Citizens Action Committee, and Edward Vaughn was the executive director. This organization developed the Black Star Clothing Factory, the Sudan Imports and Specialty Shops, which eventually became the Shrine of the Black Madonna Bookstore and Cultural Center. In 1968, The Black Messiah, a collection of sermons by Reverend Clegg, was edited and published. Alice Strother, who served on the board of the Citywide Citizens Action Committee, was a charter member of the church, served as the secretary for the church, and she also assisted Reverend Clegg in editing and typing the chapters for his book, The Black Messiah. In 1969, the concept of a Black nation evolving, the BCN Creed was developed and became a part of our church's ritual every Sunday. Action groups were organized, replacing the former area groups. Some of the activities of the action groups included distribution of clothing to the needy, working for the Black political candidates, and organizing crisis relief in Africa. In 1970, the church's name was officially changed to the Shrine of the Black Madonna. Reverend Clegg began publishing the publication of the Black News, Black Nation News. Also, Alice Strother made her transition, and Mamie Berry replaced her as a church secretary. The first annual convention of the Black Christian Nationalist Movement, the Black Teachers Conference, and the Conference of Black Youth was held at the Shrine of the Black Madonna from Wednesday, April 1st through April 5th, 1970. We had some outstanding preachers and authors who attended that conference. We had Dr. Ben Yochanan, Black historian and author from New York, Rudolph Windsor, author of From Babylon to Timbuktu, Heisel Taylor from Fisk University, Yvonne Delk of United Church of Christ, Urban Church of Education Department, Reverend Charles Cobb, Executive Director of United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice in New York, which Reverend Clegg was officer of that commission. George Bell, who we know as Askia, and Gil Sherman, which we knew as Akinyele, who were on the staff of the United Church of Christ for Commission for Racial Justice, moved from New York to Detroit and began working with the church full time. I had the honor of helping organize and planning for that convention. In April of 1970, I became I started working full time as the secretary for the church. We also, during that month of April in 1970, we had our annual spring forum, and we had some outstanding speakers each Sunday during April of that year, April of 1970. Roy Ennis was the first speaker, National Director of CORE. The second week was Dr. Eric Lincoln, Union Theological Seminary. He's author of The Black Muslims in America. Rudolph, the third Sunday of April, was Rudolph Windsor, the Black Jewish historian, author of From Babylon to Timbuktu. And the last Sunday that we had Leroy Jones, Imar Baraka, that we know as a poet, dramatist, and leader of United Network. In addition to that, the Sudan in June of the Shrine of the Black Madonna Bookstore and Culture Center was open. Barbara Martin, Cardinal Nandi, served as the manager of the Culture Center. Gladys Evans, the Reverend Clegg's other sister, and Orla Bennett, Ayile, used their artistic skills to design African attire and jewelry to be sold at the Culture Center. They both assisted with customer service as well. At the Culture Center, we had a dozen sewing machines in the lower level where we had a staff of people making African clothes for the store. A brother by the name of Herbert Bell coordinated the sewing. He was an outstanding seamstress, and he coordinated all the outfits that were made by the people that worked in the sewing department. We had a jewelry room with supplies where Ayile coordinated jewelry making for the store. The church office moved from the church to the cultural center as well. And so that's where my office was changed to the cultural center. The church began restructuring the rituals, the programs of traditional Black church to conform to the Black Christian nationalist philosophy. One of the rituals Jaramogi changed was the marriage ritual. On August 22nd, 1970, I had the first African wedding at the Shrine of the Black Madonna. My wedding gown was designed by Gladys Evans, and my jewelry was designed by Ayile. In the fall of 1970, the church organized its food co-op program. The food co-op program was operated out of the shrine and coordinated by Brother and Sister Sykes. Members of the church volunteered to help bag and pass out the food on a weekly basis. We also had other ministries that were very important to the community. And some of those community organizations were the Black Teachers Caucus, the Inner City Parents and Parents Council, the Inner City Youth Organization, the Black Studies Project, an economic development program, and our athletic club. And that's just to name a few of the ministries that we had at the church. The decade of the 1970s was a time of rapid expansion of the shrines of the Black Madonna. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Elijah, for sharing. So we're gonna have another video clip before we go on. So
between Ralph Abernathy and Jesse Jackson, I'm fighting so that America will feed its hungry, house its ill-housed, care for the sick and the needy in the war in Vietnam, solve our domestic problems here at home, stop spending billions for the moon and only pennies for the poor. This is our program in SCLC.
Thank you. The next question. Sure. I don't care about, the whole concept of a power struggle between two Black folks. Neither one having any power is absolutely ridiculous, and points out the basic problem that confronts all organizations that have been speaking here, other than CORE. Even the Muslim harangue did not deal with the basic problem of the Black man's powerlessness. Black people don't have any power. Abernathy and Jesse Jackson can wrestle from here to Los Angeles. They're still not dealing with power. Black people are powerless. They've been put outside of the whole white power structure, and all the organizations, the NAACP, Urban League, SCLC, National Council, Negro Women, all of them are talking as though Black people have power. Black people don't have any power unless we can begin to build Black institutions and realize that we're dealing with a power struggle for survival. All these organizations are leading us straight to hell and genocide. And Dr. Abernathy ought to understand it couldn't be a power struggle because neither one of them have any power. NAACP has no power. Urban League has no power. No Black organization, no Black people in America have power. They're fighting for survival from a powerless position, flat on their back, begging white folks, and that was almost the tenor of the Muslim position. They were begging white folks, please sell us some land, give us some land, let us exist. White folks are good. That's a self-hate kind of thing that Black folks find themselves degenerating into because Black people have no power and they have to beg white folks to give them whatever they want. Now, I say Black people and Black Christian nationalism says we have to approach the whole problem in terms of power. Black people have to begin to build institutions. Every institution that exists belongs to white people, was built by white people, and serves the interests of white people. And for Black organizational leaders to be sitting there talking as though they have power, as though they represent something. We want to represent everybody. We want to bring everybody together. We want to build a beautiful America. We don't want to build no kind of beautiful America. We want power for Black people, and we're going to have to fight for it. It demands confrontation and the willingness to do anything necessary to get power. And we got to take it away from white people. White people are not going to give Black people anything. Politically, economically, or any other way, Black man is no longer necessary in America. And the white man is hell-bent on genocide. So we have to understand we've got to build institutional power to deal with the white man who has decided to destroy it. The next question is for the panel from Reverend Leo Johnson in Las Vegas, Nevada. What do you envision as the major issue facing the black community? Having identified the issue, of all of the announced and unannounced presidential candidates, who do you assume would work to alleviate the problem?
Obviously, we got to face one thing. All the questions are growing out of the same distortion of the truth. No president has any power. America is not run by presidents, but by people whose names are never even in the newspaper. They're run by a white institutional establishment, and the institutions control how people act. We've elected this president to keep us out of war and this one to keep us out of war, and we stay in war because the president has nothing to do with any kind of decision. So for black people to be sitting around trying to pick a president who's going to solve the black man's problems is totally ridiculous. The black man's got to solve his own problems, and the president is not going to do it for him.
There is no power structure between Ralph.
Okay, so we are now talking about the era of Kujichagulia. And we are at 1970. And while Reverend Elijah's wedding was an exquisite event, it was a part of many things that we had to start to do in the 1970s. In 1970, if you were listening to the radio of WCHB in Detroit, you would hear Marvin Gaye saying, "What's going on? Mother, mother, everybody thinks we're wrong. But what are they to judge us simply because our hair is long? Oh, you know, we finally got to find a way to bring some understanding here today." But if you were my neighbors on the other side, you were listening to John Denver talking about Smoky Mountain, West Virginia. 1970 was a period of time when Detroit and the world was changing. Post-rebellion, white flight was the norm. Post-rebellion, Black people were trying to figure out what to do. And Jaramogi wrote, "The fear is gone." And so it was. He wrote in 1970 that we needed to, he said, "I used the concept of a nation within a nation to describe a separation that's enforced on Black people. The white man has done too good a job. I was separated from the day that I was born. You can't ask me about advocating separation. I just inherited." In 1970, Jaramogi, who had been very prominent on the Speakers Bureau all around the country, made a conscious decision that it was time to build the institutions he just talked about. You don't combat the institutions of racism with protests. He determined that you combat them with institutions. And he began the process of building those institutions. First, he developed the series of documents that became important, the basic documents that we needed. He wrote not only Black Christian Nationalism, but the Black Messiah, to give us a theological basis, a basic understanding of what we would do and where we were going. And so he then began to talk about how do we concretize what we mean by a nation within a nation. And so he went from the early days of community projects to building additional community institutions. And then he realized, he who was called the Apostle of Youth, that it was time to take this group of young people and turn them into basically an army. And so the first youth cadre was sent to Atlanta, the college cadre, because he understood that if we were going to do what we needed to do, which was to give the Black man and woman institutions that would control and create power for ourselves and no longer be asking for anything, Kujichagulia, that he needed a cadre and a corps. And so he built one. Many of the people on this call were in that cadre, and they were sent to Atlanta. But they were sent to Atlanta not just to go to Atlanta. Atlanta was a launching point. It was a space from which to grow and go. And from that space, he planned that we would go in 10 years to Philadelphia, to New York, to Los Angeles, to Chicago. There were plans. And the young people could buy into those plans, and they could build their lives around those plans. But in doing so, he realized, you know what? I'm asking people to turn their whole life over to a movement. And so an amazing institution was formed, the BCN Training Center. And it was a game changer. By virtue of having a place to live, a place where people could take care of the children, a place where you could eat and your basic needs were met, a place where you could meet at midnight, you could meet at noon, you could meet in the morning. He created a space for us to grow, not arithmetically, but exponentially. We grew geometrically. We grew in not only sending the cadre out, but we developed other amazing, exciting institutions. The Cultural Center became the hub of the city of Detroit. I don't know anybody who didn't know where the Shrine of the Black Madonna Cultural Center #1 was. Nikki Giovanni was there. Everyone was there. I don't know anybody who didn't know when, out of an understanding that religion, politics, and economics are all sacred, the Black slate was born, and the Black mayor of Detroit, the first Black mayor, was elected. The years from 1970 to 1973 were years of explosion and excitement. And I think I've used my time.
Thank you, Reverend Taliba. So here we are in the 1970s. The whole energy of the church is focused on training, development, expansion, missionary outreach, community outreach, study, research, organizing, building institutions. It's just a vibrant environment for healing and transformation. And hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Black people came through the doors of the shrines of the Black Madonna. We had Shrine 1 on Linwood and Hogarth, Shrine 2, which came later on Mack and Burns. Shrine 3 was on 7 Mile in Wyoming. Shrine 4 was on Conant. Shrine 5 later came on Broad Street. So all of this exponential growth, as Reverend Taliba talked about, was possible because of that one institution, the BCN National Training Center. And it was true to its name. We were trained, we were developed, we were sent out in cadres to take Black Christian nationalism to Black people everywhere. The Atlanta Expansion Cadre was formed in 1974. And those brothers and sisters, that was a powerful group of Black folks. I'm probably a little biased because I was cadre. They came up out of Detroit and took Black Christian nationalism to Atlanta by storm. And I'm not going to talk about that part of the history because that's Atlanta's presentation next week. But it was a powerful, powerful time in the history of our church as we gathered in our red and black and marched on Atlanta and took Atlanta by storm. So we're going to wrap it up right here. We're going to stop at 1974. Like I said earlier, this is just a small taste of what our history really is. And we are going to be working diligently to make sure that as we go into 2023, we are raising some funds so that we can put together a documentary that can really do justice to telling our own story. So with that, we're going to entertain a few questions. And if you would please put your questions in the chat. I don't want to give everybody the power to talk at the same time. So if you put your questions in the chat, I can scroll through the chat and entertain some questions. And I don't see any questions in the chat. So start chatting, and we will try to share any tidbits of the history that we can.
We have one hand raised. I believe it's education. No hand raises? Okay.
Hand raises. I want questions in the chat.
Okay.
Anybody on the panel, excuse me, anybody on the panel want to share anything else that you may not have had time to share previously while we wait for a few questions?
Well, I would. I would share that when we hear the whole conversation about theology, right? The shrine has demonstrated the reality that theology is lived. The relationships of man and God, man and nature are lived. And what Jaramogi did was not just coin a phrase, right? But create a lifestyle to allow us to grow into a theology, a relationship between humans, nature, and God that would sustain us, not for a week and not for a moment and not for a TV show, Reverend Ike, but for life.
Thank you. So we have a few questions coming in. First one, will this recording be put on Shrine Online? Yes, it will be on our Shrine Online platform for you to share at some future time. Another question says, was the Freedom Now Party started by Jaramogi? Yes, the Freedom Now Party was started by our beloved founder with the help of a small group of organizers, including some of his own siblings. So before the Freedom Now Party, they were already doing a weekly digest, speaking to the issues that were affecting our community. And so it was a natural offshoot of that process. Thank you for that question. How was the program of Akiba land developed? Very good question. So we started out with, I joined church in '71. And shortly after I joined, Rev came to me and several other members of the student movement. We were all high school kids. And he said, I want you to go and learn this system of reading called direct instruction. So we went after school to visit a school on the west side that one of his nieces taught school at, and she taught us to use the system called DISTAR. Mm-hmm. And once we learned that system, he said, okay, so now y'all gonna start tutoring kids in our neighborhood, in our community. And Akiba Land Academy had already been ordained, commissioned. The first dean of Akiba Land, his name was Dean Diop. And he developed a whole program for Afrocentric education for kids. And so we started working together to bring that program alive in 1972. So that's how Akiba Land got started. So it was the brainchild of many folks, and many people had hands on, because we had a whole lot of teachers in the church back in the early 70s, because Rev was so instrumental in bringing about changes in the Detroit public school system for Black teachers and educators. So we had so many teachers, it was just inevitable we'd have to have our own home school, freedom school, that we called the Akiba Land Academy. Before it was a thing to have home school, we were doing it big. The Algiers Motel Trail at the shrine.
It was a trial.
Yeah. You want to speak on that, Reverend Doctor?
Okay. Yes. During the '60s, the shrine was the place. I mean, you had so many different groups that were coming there, and you had different groups had different uniforms on, and then they had an Algiers motel where some brothers were killed over on Woodward and Virginia Park. And they were killed because they were with some white women, and the police killed them. And so we didn't expect any justice to be done, and it wasn't. So we had our own trial. Well, I wasn't a member of the church, but Jaramogi and some of the members of the church had their own trial at the Shrine of the Black Madonna, and it was packed, rafter to rafter. And they tried the police in absentia and found them guilty. And
that was a group of people that included Ken Cockrell.
Oh yes, thank you.
And of course Jaramogi's brother. And Jaramogi's brother, Henry Clay.
Henry Clay, the attorney, yes.
Thank you for sharing that. And that's an excellent point. During the early 70s, we had, after the rebellions in Detroit, there were literally dozens and dozens and dozens of Black groups and organizations and committees and clubs and fraternities and all over the city of Detroit. And a lot of them found camaraderie at the shrines of the Black Madonna. And even if they didn't use our building for meetings and events and things, they always frequented and supported the things that we did. So we had a huge community coalition in the 70s. And that was really our policy, that we always had our doors open to Black people who had a message or something meaningful to offer to the liberation struggle. So I'm gonna take about 2 more questions. I see a question that says, was there not a filmmaker or producer working on a documentary on the PAOCC? Not that I'm aware of. We do have a documentary that was completed by the Swedish Film Institute, and that's about the story of PAOCC Liberia, but there's nobody working on a documentary about the PAOCC. We did, Jaramogi Kimathi did commission someone to begin work on a documentary about the Shrine Bookstore and cultural centers this year. And so that is in the works, but nothing about the church. And as I said earlier, that's something that we ought to be trying to envision that we can make happen in the near future. And the last question, go ahead.
Bishop, I was going to say that one of the things that is part of our roots were as a movement in cooperation with our community. And so when Jaramogi Kimathi talks about us as a movement, more than a series of congregations, it is consistent with the beginning at St. Mark's, the growth through Central Congregation, and the home that we provided for the RNA, which was the Republic of New Africa, the home we provided for the planners of the first Freedom March in 1964, and the home that we provide elsewhere for Black Lives Matter and for all movements of Black people who understand that there is nothing more sacred than the liberation of Black people. That's who we are.
Thank you for sharing that.
And after Congress.
Yeah, so there have been many, and again, we continue to support and build coalition with Black people who understand that if it's supporting the liberation struggle for Black people, then it's good. So the next question says, how large was the college cadre movement during the 70s? Excellent question, because Rev, once he released the Black Messiah and Black Christian Nationalism, he was being sought after all over the country. Every college and university in the country were inviting him to speak. So he spoke on college campuses and universities all through the late 60s and early 70s. And so we had a huge influx of college students into the church during the early 70s. And that's how the college cadre movement got started. So we had college campuses, college cadres formed on almost every college in Michigan. But it went further than that. In Chicago and Philadelphia and other states, there were college cadres popping up. People would come to Detroit. In 1972, we had Reverend Cleggs organized a summer seminary. And this was 100 brothers and sisters from college campuses all over the country who came to Detroit and stayed the whole summer and were taking classes from 9 in the morning to 5 in the evening, 5 days a week, and some on Saturday. learning the gospel of Black Christian nationalism for the express purpose of carrying that gospel back to their home cities. And that's what happened. At the end of the summer seminary, 100 brothers and sisters were ordained and sent out to carry the gospel of Black liberation. Dr. Ben Yochanan was mentioned. He was one of those who was ordained by Reverend Clegg. And because he was so astute as it relates to history and theology, Jaramogi commissioned him to rewrite the Bible, to tell the real biblical story. And that's what sparked his journey to do that. So there was a lot that came out of the college cadre movement of the early 70s. And yes, there's a follow-up question. Is there thought about establishing college outreach movements again? Absolutely. Because in order for us to carry the movement forward, we have to have the input of our brightest minds, young Black people who have a mind to understand our need to fight and struggle to end our oppression. So we're going to.
In fact, Bishop, we have 6 freshmen at the Howard University.
Yeah, so we're actually doing it as we speak. But yes, we have to reawaken that movement of college students because they're the ones who are going to carry us into the future. So again, this was just an overview. We can't do justice to our history in an hour, but we certainly wanted, again, to share some of the peaks and some of the essence of who we are as Black Christian nationalists and how our movement grew from the corner of Linwood and Hogarth here in Detroit. So we thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to part 2 of our journey as we move to the ATL, the Dirty South, next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if there's nothing else, we're going to have a prayer of benediction. Almighty One, we are so grateful for this time we had together. We ask that you continue to allow us to understand what you have called us to do and the mission to transform the minds, hearts, and spirits of our people. Give us courage and strength for the days of struggle that lie ahead. Help us to be open to the guidance of the Holy Spirit in our lives in order that we can listen and hear the direction that we have been called into. Give us your divine providence and protection as we go out into the world each day to do your will. Bless our elders and our youth, those who are sick and shut in, keep them in your divine care. We pray this and all things in the name of our revolutionary example, Jesus, the revolutionary Black Messiah. And we say Ashe and Amen.